And now to dumb down our minds a little bit by taking a look at my
15th favorite movie of the year, that is Dumb and Dumber 2. Once upon a time, there was the little comedy that came out 4 months after I was born called Dumb and Dumber. Shortly after that, there was an awful yet thankfully short-lived spin-off cartoon TV series. 7 years after it finished, a prequel called Dumb and Dumberer, When Harry Met Lloyd, was made, with none of the main cast and crew from the original. It was funny, just not as funny as the original, and I felt that Jim Carrey and Jeff Daniels would have reprised their roles if they would have had a lot of makeup and costumes to look like they were in high school. 11 years after that, we finally have Jim and Jeff reprising their roles as Lloyd Christmas and Harry Dunn in a bad-reviewed yet hilarious sequel 2 decades in the making. Also felt that the movie shouldn't be titled Dumb and Dumber 3 since the prequel was the second movie of a franchise. But anyway, this movie kept me laughing and grossed out like crazy. Aside from a now obvious explanation of where Lloyd and Harry have been for the last 20 years, we have some familiar faces from the first movie played by the same actors, a smoking hot Rachel Melvin as Dimwit Penny, cameos by the legendary Bill Murray in that disgusting pig Mama June, and a lot of funny twists. I think I may have even embarrassed myself in the theater when I went to see this movie during the final twist explanation. I won't give it away, but when Harry explains to Lloyd about said final twist, I leaned back on my theater seat and said, "Oh my god, not another twist." Sorry if the people behind me had been laughing at me, and not Lloyd and Harry talking. So let's get to the parts I didn't like. Laurie Holden's villainous character has a foot fetish, and the retirement home scene. I was creeped out when I first saw that in the trailer, especially after seeing something like that in a Family Guy episode involving Peter and a late friend of his late mother. When you see that, you'll get what I'm saying. And okay, I did laugh hard at the end of that seeing the actual movie because when Harry asks Lloyd what it was, he replies, "I think that was her grangina." So, it looks like if there were to be another D&D movie, it would be called Dumb and Dumber 3, The Curse of the Grangina, or Dumb and Dumber 3, The Grangina Returns, or maybe it's just me trying to be funny. In conclusion, this is as funny as the original classic, and you cannot miss the after credits scene. Seriously, only a fool will leave during the credits of this. Again, won't give it away, but it'll definitely make you put on Seabass tab.
But let's get serious for a sec. If there were to be another Dumb and Dumber movie, then Lloyd and Harry need to seriously get the girl and lose their virginity. Enough said. Anyway, back to the Bible side of things.
And taking the number 14 spot is Exodus, Gods and Kings. Now we all know the story of Moses and delivering the Hebrew slaves out of Egypt and into the Promised Land, but this is somewhat different than the story we all knew. The special effects on the plagues were cool to watch, and I enjoyed the scene where the alligators were eating the shit out of those Egyptians, but that's not how the first plague of turning the water into blood is portrayed in the actual story. The movie doesn't even have a scene where baby Moses is floating the river in a basket, nor does the adult Moses ever tell Ramesses, wait for it, "Let my people go." Plus, the reason for Moses' exile from Egypt is much different than the real story. He did not leave because he's Hebrew, he left because he accidentally killed a guard abusing a slave. And hey, another flaw to mention for all of us Christians is that God does not speak to Moses, but Moses is instead guided by a boy named Malak, who is a representation of a big cheese. However, the battle scenes were pretty sweet to watch, and the return of the Red Sea was awesome, but all of this goes to show that critics didn't like it so much because it's somewhat style over substance. Hell, the way Ramesses' final scene of being defeated was portrayed was not well done. So despite the brilliant action, cinematography, acting, and 3D, this is a better 2014 biblical movie than Noah, but obviously it's not as good and not a more faithful Moses movie as DreamWorks Animation's The Prince of Egypt.
And hey, religious folk like me would have loved to see the rest of Moses' life in film, like the slaves betraying God by praising another one, wandering in the desert for 4 decades, finally reaching the Promised Land, and the death of Moses, but it looks like that'll never happen. So let's move forward to the only horror movie I want to see in the past year.
And taking the number 13 spot is Dracula Untold. While it's nowhere near as incredible as Gary Oldman's tear-jerking take on the Bram Stoker classic from 1992, it has to be the second greatest Dracula movie ever made. One of my favorite actors, Sam Worthington from Avatar in both Clash and Wrath for the Titans, was originally cast in the title role, but the lead role now went to Luke Evans, who no doubt mastered the role. I'm still confused as to why critics would bash this origin story, but they don't know what they're missing because it's a shitload of fun. The visuals were breathtaking, the action sequences were top notch, and the acting is fantastic, especially the awesome performance from Game of Thrones' Charles Dance as the Master Vampire. Now, this looks to be the first of Universal's revived monster cinematic universe, with the Master Vampire as a franchise's own Nick Fury. But despite my hate for the studio's previous monster reboots and tributes like the Mummy trilogy, Van Helsing, and the Wolfman, I am personally willing to give these guys another shot with these new reboots, as long as Luke Evans' Dracula will team up with these guys eventually. Overall, if you love vampires and Game of Thrones and want to watch a movie that's like a GOT episode with vampires, then here is your answer.
The Mummy reboot comes out in 2016. Another Universal monster movie, presumably the Wolfman reboot, comes out in 2017. A Van Helsing reboot is also talked about, and both Legendary Pictures and Guillermo del Toro want Guillermo himself to direct the Frankenstein movie, but that's all we know so far. Now moving on back to the animation side of things is a movie that came out a week later.
And that movie taking the number 12 spot is The Book of Life. As a fan of most big studio anime movies, not a lot of people like me were very aware of this work of art. Aside from its beauty, it teaches us a lot about the Mexican holiday known as the Day of the Dead, and the movie is surprisingly better than I expected. Think of it as a mixture of Tim Burton's dark clay anime movies with Hotel Transylvania. Well, okay, some of the songs weren't all that good, and boy, I was annoyed when Manola and the Three Rodriguez brothers did a version of Mumford & Sons. I will wait, cause seriously, the Mumford & Sons suck. But the movie does tell a wonderful story about death, romance, and has a packed voice cast. Aside from the awesome villain performances of Ron Perlman as Ibalba and Dan Navarro as Chacal, another favorite character of mine has to be Joaquin, voiced by Channing Tatum. I mean, he's so self-absorbed and egotistical that his best line has to be, "Why don't you fight a real man with a really awesome mustache?" I just can't get over that line. For another lead actor and character worth talking about is the Candlemaker, voiced by Ice Cube. Aside from being funny in this movie, having both Channing and Ice in this movie is pretty much like an animated Jump Street reunion, but without Jonah Hill. So if you love animation and haven't seen this yet, go see it. It's that good.
And apparently, George A.R. Rodriguez, who spent 16 years making this movie, imagines it as a trilogy with the second movie focusing on Joaquin and the third movie focusing on Maria. But one problem. Despite the positive reviews, the movie did not make a lot of money, so George A., you still want to make the sequels? Anyway, as we finally put the 7 out of 10 range behind us, we kick off the 8 out of 10 range with a movie
taking the number 11 spot known as The Equalizer. Now, I wasn't really interested in this movie until I first saw the trailer back in June. Before that, I wasn't interested in it because it's based on an old crime drama TV series from the 80s that I'm not aware of, and I judged the film's plot that made me suggest that Denzel Washington made a movie that's somewhat of a remake or a sequel to his awful Man on Fire movie that came out a decade before, with Chloe Grace Moretz replacing Dakota Fanning. But boy, was I wrong. It is a completely different story with not just lots of bloody, harder action, but shows Denzel Washington at his best with a lot of cool settings, great chemistry with other characters, and some nice jump scares. The one that got me the most has to be the scene where Denzel stabs one of the Russian mafia members under the chin with a corkscrew, and you see it inside the guy's mouth, and when that happens, I screamed, "Holy fuck!" in the theater. Man, that was some messed up shit. Now, the film's theme song, Guts Over Fear, from Eminem and C, was a good song, but I kind of thought it didn't play well during the end credits. Though the big flaw of this movie is no doubt the fact that we don't see how Denzel kills the cash register thug with a sledgehammer. It's just that same story from the trailer. The character Jenny gets robbed, her ring is taken away, Denzel gets the hammer, Jenny gets the ring back, and Denzel wipes the hammer and puts it away. Just unbelievable. However, this movie was so fun to watch that these guys better make a sequel. If so, it will be Denzel Washington's first ever franchise.
And here's a fun fact. Before The Equalizer, the only other Denzel Washington movie I liked was Jerry Bruckheimer's first Disney movie, Remember the Titans. However, this is much better than said movie. Going back to